Hola, buenos días. Estamos aquí en Amigos de Seattle Radio. Mi nombre es Geraldi, de parte de Duwamish Valley Sustainability Association. Um, para visitarnos y escucharnos, puede ir a www.adacradio.org y seguir a Amigos de Seattle en las redes sociales como Amigos de Seattle. Esto incluye YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch. Um, TikTok y X o Twitter, como se conocía antes. Entonces, comencemos.
Ok, buenos días amigos del Duwamish Valley. Nos encontramos en un nuevo programa, La Hora Sostenible. El día de hoy vamos a hablar sobre los desperdicios en las residencias, cómo reducir los desperdicios en residencias. Y para ello tenemos como invitada especial a Cheryl Anayas. Ella es una profesional de Seattle Public Utilities, quien nos va a comentar sobre este tema. La temática de este programa va a ser en inglés y en español. Tenemos a dos de nuestros jóvenes que participan en nuestro proyecto, Sebastián Hernández y María Pérez. Antes de empezar el programa, quisiéramos, Cheryl, una pequeña introducción de tu persona.
Cheryl, could you introduce yourself, please?
I would love to. I'm Cheryl Nias with Seattle Public Utilities, as Edwin had introduced me a moment ago, and I'm so pleased to be here to talk about residential food waste prevention and ways to engage all of you, easily engage, I should say, in this effort. Glad to be here.
Hola, me llamo Cheryl. Estoy aquí de parte de Seattle Public Utilities y hoy voy a hablar sobre la prevención del desperdicio de alimentos residenciales. Muy feliz de estar aquí.
Gracias. María y Sebastián, ¿se podrían introducir ustedes antes de empezar el programa?
Sí, hola, me llamo María, soy una de los project coordinators aquí con DVSA, trabajando en este proyecto con 5 jóvenes.
Me llamo Sebastián Hernández. Yo también soy parte de DVSA y estoy aquí para la traducción.
Ok, Sebastián, entonces podemos empezar con las preguntas, por favor.
Ok. Primero en inglés.
Sí.
What does food waste prevention and rescue mean, and why is it important? ¿Qué significa la prevención y rescate del desperdicio de alimentos y por qué es importante?
These are great questions. And if I may, Edwin, is that all right if I go ahead and jump in to provide a response?
Yep.
Wonderful. So food waste prevention means to stop edible food from being thrown away. At Seattle Public Utilities, we define food waste prevention as the activity of preventing food waste at every stage of the supply chain. This includes food production, processing, distribution, retail, and consumption. Food waste prevention is important because a significant amount of edible food ends up in Seattle's waste stream, roughly about a third, which is substantial, even though it is not allowed in the garbage, and it is a major contributor to methane gas emissions. So really important when we're talking about climate change. And we'll get into some of the slides in a moment, but that's sort of the big picture around food waste prevention. And I can get into food rescue, but if Sebastian would like to translate before I get too wordy, I'm happy to pause.
La prevención del desperdicio de alimentos implica evitar que los alimentos comestibles sean desechados. En SPU definimos la prevención del desperdicio de alimentos como la actividad de evitar el desperdicio de alimentos en cada etapa de la cadena de suministro. Esto incluye la producción, procesamiento, distribución, venta, al por menor y consumo de alimentos. La prevención del desperdicio de alimentos es importante porque una cantidad significativa de alimentos comestibles termina en la corriente de residuos de Seattle, aproximadamente un tercio. A pesar de que no está permitido en la basura y es un gran contribuyente a las emisiones de gas metano. El rescate de alimentos es el proceso de recolectar alimentos comestibles no vendidos de establecimientos minoristas como supermercados y hoteles y redistribuirlos a las personas que más lo necesitan. Las organizaciones que realizan operaciones de rescate de alimentos incluyen bancos de alimentos y programas de comida.
Thank you, Sebastian. And in terms of food rescue, the focus, of course, of the presentation is on food waste prevention, but I would like to provide a high-level definition of food rescue, which is the process of collecting unsold edible food from retail establishments like grocery stores or hotels and redistributing it to people who need it most. Organizations that conduct food rescue operations include food banks and meal programs. Those are sort of the most commonly recognized food rescue operations. And again, going back to prevention, that's the process that stops waste from occurring in the first place, which is why it's so important. While rescue captures unsold food that would have gone to waste, but instead is redistributed to people. And composting turns this food into a resource for creating healthy soil. Preventing food waste and redistributing extra food to people who need it helps everyone in the community. It is economically beneficial while also protecting the environment and helping make sure people have enough to eat. And go ahead into the next slide and I can briefly discuss the utility. But with that, I will pause.
Como mencioné antes, el rescate de alimentos es el proceso de recolectar alimentos comestibles no vendidos de establecimientos minoristas, como supermercados y hoteles, y redistribuirlos a las personas que más lo necesitan. Las organizaciones que realizan operaciones de rescate de alimentos incluyen bancos de alimentos y programas de comida. La prevención evita que se produzca el desperdicio en el primer lugar, mientras que el rescate captura alimentos no vendidos que habrían sido desperdiciados, pero en cambio se redistribuyen a las personas. Y el compostaje convierte estos alimentos en un recurso para crear suelo saludable. La prevención del desperdicio de alimentos y la redistribución de alimentos extra a las personas que lo necesitan beneficia a toda la comunidad. Es económicamente beneficioso, además de proteger el medio ambiente y garantizar que las personas tengan suficiente para comer. Where does food waste occur and what types of food are wasted the most? ¿Dónde ocurre el desperdicio de alimentos y qué tipo de alimentos se desperdicia más?
Thank you, Sebastian, for those great questions. I will jump into in just a moment. I want to do a very quick slide about the Seattle Public Utilities organization. And this is, again, just a snapshot of all the services that we offer. Again, the focus will be on food waste prevention, but I wanted to share that, part of our goals here are to deliver equitable essential services, such as you see on the slide. We want to steward environment and health, and we want to empower our customers, community, and employees. And of course, last but not least, we want to strengthen our utilities business practices, which is why it's so important to be here today. And I will jump into the questions, like I said, but I'll give Sebastian a moment to translate.
Nomás quería hablar un poco sobre este slide que habla sobre los trabajos que hace Seattle Public Utilities, que se enfoca mayormente en la salud del agua para toda la gente y ahora vamos a hablar sobre las respuestas.
All right, next slide. So this is the solid waste hierarchy, which we'll get into in just a moment as I respond to those prior questions. So food waste is everywhere, as you can imagine. For Seattle Public Utilities, we are primarily focused on looking at food waste using a sector-specific approach for two main categories, which may or may not be super familiar, but I'm suspecting that they are. One is residential, single family and multifamily housing. The second is commercial business establishments, such as restaurants, offices, and things of that nature. Types of commonly wasted food can vary depending on location, audience, etc. And based on Seattle Public Utilities' recent 2020 residential garbage and recycling stream composition study, most food waste in both the single family and the multifamily garbage streams was packaged edible food, such as bagged produce, meat, and dairy products. A significant portion of food waste in Seattle comes from the residential sector, which is so great that I'm talking to you today because I can offer some really easy tips that you can apply, right after this podcast. And so residential food waste prevention is really one of the key strategies Seattle will use to support the statewide commitment to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. So it's an ambitious goal, but we have easy tips that everyone can apply. And the reason that you see the slide in front of you, the solid waste hierarchy, is because you can see in green where prevention is the largest component, which is, again, why we are focusing on prevention, because really it's the primary way we can prevent food, of course, from entering the landfill in the first place. And that tip of the upside down triangle is landfill, because of course we want to prevent anything from going into, that's the very last resort for items to go into the landfill. So that's the primary reason you're looking at this hierarchy.
El desperdicio de alimentos está en todas partes. Para SPU nos enfocamos principalmente en examinar el desperdicio de alimentos utilizando un enfoque específico por sector para dos categorías principales, la residencial y la comercial. Los tipos de alimentos comúnmente desperdiciados pueden variar según la ubicación, si estamos en público, etc. Según el estudio reciente de composición de residuos y reciclaje residencial de SPU, la mayoría de los desperdicios de alimentos en las corrientes de basura, tanto de viviendas unifamiliares como multifamiliares, fueron alimentos comestibles empaquetados, como productos agrícolas envasados, carne y productos lácteos. Una parte significativa del desperdicio de alimentos en Seattle proviene del sector residencial. Como tal, la prevención del desperdicio de alimentos residenciales es una de las estrategias clave que Seattle utilizará para apoyar el compromiso estatal de reducir el desperdicio de alimentos en un 50% para el 2030. What is SPU doing to help the community prevent food waste at home? ¿Qué está haciendo SPU para ayudar a la comunidad a prevenir el desperdicio de alimentos en casa?
Those are great questions as well. And with that, I will ask Edwin to move the slide forward. And I will briefly describe these slides before going into the questions. So this is a snapshot of what we call the food cycle. And without getting in too much detail, this is really to illustrate the various points in which food is impacting sort of that process, right? So we distribute food, we buy the food, we of course eat the food, then we compost that food for the food scraps, that is, and then we grow the food, and then we process the food, and then the cycle sort of goes back once again. And the idea is that there are many steps and many opportunities to prevent food waste in each of these components. Next slide. And this is a very busy slide, but the idea behind this is there are many different resources as well as consequences that happen within the food cycle. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail if we have some time, but really one of those that I want to elevate is climate change. When food goes into the landfill, it sits in there and emits methane gas, and there is no oxygenation. So it's really upon us to think more critically about how we get that food out of the landfill, and ideally we prevent it in the first place. And as you can see, there's all of these intensive resources that go into that food cycle, whether it's water, it's energy, it's fuel, it's land, it's labor. So there's, again, this sort of bigger picture to consider when you talk about food waste prevention. In terms of, and then next slide. And again, this is just to re-highlight all the pieces that I mentioned a moment ago, that if we're preventing, if we're not utilizing those food resources, we're really wasting the time, the energy, and all those other components I just mentioned just as much, right? For no good reason. So we want to be thinking more critically, like I said earlier, about how do we stop that cycle in the first place? Next slide. And this is a reminder, again, how substantial food waste is. In the United States, it's roughly about 40% of food that goes uneaten. And much of that waste happens in our very own homes. And this is part of the reason why I'm so excited to be here today, because I'll be able to share some of those tips and tricks that you all can do in your own homes to prevent food waste. Which brings me to Sebastian's question. So SBU, next slide, manages the Love Food Stop Waste program, also known as LFSW, which continues to provide information and resources to help Seattle's residents waste less food. Love Food Stop Waste engages residents across all of Seattle in preventing food from becoming waste, which has environmental, social, and economic impacts, which you just saw in the previous slides. And by partnering with our residents, the program's purpose is to explore many food saving strategies and reduce ultimately the amount of edible food that ends up in our waste stream. And the slide that you're seeing in front of you, if you have the opportunity to view along with the audio, is SBU is in the community often, not only speaking on behalf of the Love Food Stop Waste program, but we primarily in that regard, we're tabling, we're at events like the Duwamish, I think it's River Festival, is that what it's called? Just recently, we were at the Lunar New Year event. So many community-centered events we want to have a presence at so that we can really meet community members where they're at. And one bonus, I would say, among many with the program is that our materials, such as the one I'm holding here, are available in 11 different languages. So we go well beyond English so that we can really make our resources accessible. And to further on this topic, next slide. We'll get into I'll get into some details around food storage, the food storage guides, that is, and some other materials. But SBU also provides food waste prevention education online via ongoing social media campaigns. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. SBU also conducts in-person outreach and education, as I noted earlier, at various community events. So if you know of something that you want us to be present at, just let us know, and I'll provide my email contact information at the end of the presentation. We have many informational guides on food storage, like you see on the slide, if you're able to view. We have tips on freezer storage and how to do that properly, and much, much more. Materials are currently available, like I said, in 11 different languages, and we also provide residents with easy tips for reducing food waste at home in many, many ways. And here's some to consider. There's a few, so I can pause before jumping into all those, if that helps.
That's good. SPU administra el programa Love Food Stop Waste, que continúa brindando información y recursos para ayudar a los residentes de Seattle a desperdiciar menos alimentos. Love Food Stop Waste involucra a los residentes en la prevención de que los alimentos se conviertan en desperdicio, lo que tiene impactos ambientales, sociales y económicos. Al asociarse con los residentes, el propósito del programa es explorar estrategias de ahorro de alimentos y reducir la cantidad de alimentos comestibles que terminan en la corriente de residuos de Seattle. SBU proporciona educación sobre la prevención del desperdicio de alimentos en línea a través de campañas continuas en redes sociales. Puedes conectarte con nosotros en Facebook, Instagram y Twitter para obtener actualizaciones. SBU también realiza divulgación y educación en personas en varios eventos comunitarios y otras actividades para promover formas sencillas para que los residentes participen en la prevención de desperdicio de alimentos. Tenemos muchas guías informativas sobre el almacenamiento de alimentos, almacenamiento en el congelador y más. Los materiales están disponibles actualmente en 11 idiomas diferentes. También proporcionamos a los residentes consejos sencillos para reducir el desperdicio de alimentos en casa de muchas maneras. Aquí algunas a considerar.
Thanks, Sebastian. If it's okay, I can jump into some of the tips.
Yep.
Great. So as you can see on your screen, hopefully you can, and if you can, I will talk through them. But as I also mentioned earlier, we at SVU provide a variety of resources to make engaging in food waste prevention really easy. And I personally love the accessibility and the ease of implementation for these tips because I'm a mother of a 2-year-old, and I'm always thinking about how can I save money when I go to the grocery store. So I'll start off with one that I think is really important and I want to drive home. And we have some of the snapshots on the slide for some of the resources that we have. A meal planning guide, an Eat First sticker, which is really to prompt us to move forward our items in the fridge that are about to go bad, or we know that we need to eat them first. And so we don't want to store them in the back. We want to make them highly visible. So one is buy only what you need. Easier said than done. But the purpose of meal planning, of course, is to decide what you're going to buy before you even go to the grocery store. Making a meal plan and creating a grocery list may take a little bit of extra time, but trust me, it is worth it. You'll save money by wasting less food. And I'll do this, by a quick inventory of what's in my cupboard and my fridge. And then I'll think about writing down all the things that I'm going to be making for the week. So that really helps me out. Another tip is eating fresh, local food. We have a whole abundance of items to choose from here in the Pacific Northwest. So we're really lucky in that regard. So when you can buy local, that's always a bonus. And you get food while it's at its freshest. So it will last longer typically. And of course, with spring right around the corner, we have many great options like farmers market for farm fresh food, again, just for example. And also our tips on food storage are really encouraging residents to think about how to store food to stay fresh longer, right? So we are not doing so many back and forth trips to the grocery store. So taking a little extra time to store food to last longer, like I said, can save you money since you don't need to buy as much food. You can think about the longevity of, that bag of potatoes or that, bunch of bananas. There are lots of easy ways to help food last longer, such as I, for instance, really love to buy fresh herbs. And a good way to ensure that there's some longevity or extension of life for those herbs, say cilantro or basil, is I'll remove the rubber band, I'll pat it down, I'll wrap it in a damp paper towel, and then I will store it in my vegetable storage area. Or I'll put it in a mason jar and fill that mason jar maybe half full with water. Again, take that rubber band off if it's banded together and put it in an area that's not really bursting with sunlight, so that again, it's sort of has a longer shelf life. So those are just some quick tips. And then another one I want to mention is freezing food for later. Using your freezer is such a great way to reduce food waste. I know myself, I shop in bulk, like at Costco, but I'm always mindful of how am I going to store this because I know I'm not going to eat it all at once. At least my family isn't. So it's also a really great time saver since you'll have food already prepared for when you're in a hurry. So here are some very, very quick tips to keep in mind when freezing food. Next slide. I'm not sure if that one is coming up. Oh, that's our social media reminder. You can go back actually. Sorry about that confusion. So keep your freezer temperature at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Freeze food in meal-sized portions. So what that means for our household is if I buy a 20-pack of tilapia fish, I will make sure that there are 2 to each Ziploc bag or reusable bag to store into the freezer so that I know that I can just take that out when ready and they're in meal-sized portions. And then, of course, prevent freezer burn by keeping air away from food. So try and make sure that that air is removed when you're, say it's a reusable bag, pushing that out, making those closures really tight. And then I also like to label packaging. when I'm thinking about freezer items with the date and the contents, because I don't know if you're like me, but I will lose track of when I put something in the freezer. So it's always nice to just have that date label. So I know again how long it's been in the freezer. And then I thaw really only as much food as I plan to use at a time. And that's another tip. So again, for our family of 3, it's my husband, myself, and our toddler daughter. We really know kind of what size proportions we'll need. So I'll keep that in mind when I'm meal planning, when I'm preparing to go to the grocery store, making that list and thawing out any necessary items. And of course, one thing I always like to highlight is that you can visit the USDA website, United States Department of Agriculture, on more information on freezing and food safety, if that is a topic that you're interested in. And once again, the slideshow indicates or includes a snapshot of some of the many, many resources SPU offers about all of these items and more.
Uno de los consejos que hablamos era comprar solo lo que necesitas. El propósito de la planificación de comida es decidir qué vas a comprar antes de ir al supermercado. Hacer un plan de comida y crear una lista de compras lleva un poco más tiempo, pero vale la pena. Ahorrarás dinero al desperdiciar menos comida. Otro consejo es comer alimentos frescos y locales. Compra local cuando puedas. Obtendrás alimentos cuando estén a su punto más fresco, por lo que duran más. Con la primavera a la vuelta de la esquina, tenemos muchas opciones excelentes como los mercados de agricultores para obtener alimentos frescos de granja. También almacena los alimentos para que duren más. Tomarte un poco más de tiempo para almacenar los alimentos puede ahorrarte dinero, ya que no necesitarás comprar tanta comida. Hay muchas formas sencillas de ayudar a que los alimentos duren más. Congela los alimentos para más tarde. Usar tu congelador es una excelente manera de reducir el desperdicio de alimentos. También es un gran ahorro de tiempo, ya que tendrás alimentos preparados para cuando estés apurado. Aquí hay algunos consejos a tener en cuenta al congelar alimentos. Mantén la temperatura de tu congelador a 0 grados Fahrenheit o menos. Congela los alimentos en proporciones del tamaño de una comida. Evita la quemadura del congelador manteniendo el aire alejado de los alimentos. Etiqueta el envase con la fecha y el contenido. Descongela solo la cantidad de alimentos que planeas usar en una sola vez. También, si quieren más información, pueden visitar el sitio web de USDA para obtener información sobre congelación y seguridad alimentaria. What resources does SPU have available to help people prevent food waste at home? ¿Qué recursos tiene disponibles SPU para ayudar a las personas a prevenir el desperdicio de alimentos en casa?
Thank you for the question. If you want to go back one slide, I do want to highlight, I know there's resources on this slide if you're able to view, but I'll go back to maybe one backwards actually.
Oh, el slide anterior.
Uno más before. Perfecto. Gracias. So I wanted to put this slide back on again for those who are able to view along with the audio. So this is our food storage guide. And to answer the great question that was also another one posed by, of course, Sebastian, SBU has several educational resources via our Love Food Stop Waste program, which is the program that I manage, via our website for the public to download or print for free. You can also contact us. Like I said, I will leave my contact information at the end of the podcast if you'd like any hard copies of our materials. And 2 of the most popular resources, that we provide to help people reduce food waste at home are our food storage guide, number 1, and number 2, our freezer storage guide. And I went into a little bit more detail a moment ago around the freezer storage guide, but these in particular are really popular because they're really great visuals. They're easy to follow. And like I said, and have mentioned throughout the podcast, these are tips that are intended to be easy to do right after we get off this call. They're not intended to be difficult, so that they're really applicable to wide audiences. And one of the things that I love in particular about the food storage guide, again, if you're able to see it alongside the audio, is that we pinpoint specific areas in your fridge where things should be stored, where poultry needs to be, and veggies need to be. And of course, you can always go to the USDA website if you want more details on particulars around like freezer storage. But they're highly visual, they're highly accessible, and I always welcome people to reach out to me and my team. If you have like an event, or you have a classroom setting and you want to distribute and educate folks, students, youth, others that are interested in this topic, we are more than happy to supply those resources.
SPU tiene varios recursos educativos a través de nuestro sitio web Love Food Stop Waste para que el público los descargue e imprima de forma gratuita. También puedes contactarnos si deseas copias impresas de cualquier de nuestros materiales. Dos de los recursos más populares que proporcionamos para ayudar a las personas a reducir el desperdicio de alimentos en casa son nuestra guía de alimentos y guía de almacenamiento en el congelador. La guía de almacenamiento de alimentos se enfoca principalmente en el almacenamiento de alimentos frescos y proporciona consejos como mantener separadas las frutas y verduras, ya que las verduras se echarán a perder más rápido si las almacenas con frutas, o mantener la leche en un estante en la nevera en el lugar de la puerta, o almacenar las papas lejos de la cebolla, ya que las cebollas hacen que las papas broten más rápido. La guía de almacenamiento en el congelador proporciona instrucciones paso a paso sobre cómo congelar diferentes alimentos como verduras, hierbas, carne y sobras. También proporciona consejos para congelar cómo prevenir la quemadura del congelador. The generation of garbage is inevitable. What can we do with the food leftovers generated in homes? La generación de basura es inevitable. ¿Qué podemos hacer con las sobras de comida generadas en los hogares?
This is one of my favorite questions, so I'm so glad this is included in today's podcast. And if you can forward the presentation to a few more slides. Great, thank you. So I always encourage people to love their leftovers. I like to eat out as much as the next person. So thinking about how I can store it after I leave that restaurant if I have leftovers is really important to me. So I'll get into a little bit more about how to store them, your items properly, and repurposing them so that you can really think about how to create new meals from those leftovers. And I should also emphasize that there are usually two reasons we end up throwing out our leftovers. And before I get into that, you'll see, if you're looking alongside the presentation, the social media snapshots that we have about Love Food Stop Waste that are really touching on ways that people can share their own input as well. So we want to encourage that two-way dialogue. What are you already doing to prevent food waste? We always want to hear about folks' strategies in this regard. So going back to the two main reasons that we end up throwing out our leftovers in the first place. One, we forget about them. I am no stranger to that. It happens a lot because they'll sit in the back of the fridge. I didn't label them, or it's just too crowded. So it's just very easy for them to be overshadowed with whatever else is in the fridge. Two, we get bored eating the same thing. And that's not unusual as well. Luckily, there are easy answers to both problems. And one of the things I'll typically like to say is, you can remember to eat your leftovers by including leftovers in your meal planning process. So for example, if I had extra white rice from getting takeout from a Thai restaurant, I'll be thinking, oh, I have that box, about 3 cups of rice. Maybe I'm going to make a stir fry. So that is something I factor into the meal planning process. Another way is to think about storing your leftovers in clear, transparent containers so that you can see what needs to be eaten. And one slide or question a few moments ago is the prompt of eat first, the eat first sticker, that is, where you can label that on a container. So again, it's just an additional reminder to pull those items to the front of the fridge and not forget about them. And really keeping a list of the leftovers that are stored in your freezer as a reminder. I do eat out, but not a tremendous amount. But for those that do, I think that's always important. And, to each their own. If it's a Post-it note on the fridge or something like a sticker, like I said, on a container that reminds you to eat it and not forget about it. Those are really good ways to not forget about your leftovers. And I'll also touch on ways to keep leftovers from getting boring. One thing I also like to keep in mind is freezing my leftovers if possible, and then to remix those items in my meals. I'm trying to think of something recently. Sometimes if I have extra vegetables from a meal, like if it's like an existing stir fry from, say it's a Chinese restaurant, or maybe I have leftover taco meat, I can also freeze it if it's like a catered event that I had for a birthday party. I can think about putting those in reusable bags and labeling them. And this is again, if you're planning like a big meal and you have a bunch of leftovers, right? So freezing them is a good option when you don't have the time or energy to cook. And there's lots of websites out there, such as the New York Times webpage about leftovers. I can't remember the specific title, but essentially it lists or includes recipes for you to consider with your leftover ingredients. And they're always switching it up. So that's a fun one to check out. And another one is called Super Cook, a zero waste recipe generator. And you can view this for ideas on how to make leftovers really delicious the second or third time. And you can populate, I believe, your ingredients. It's been a while since I've used this, but the ingredients that you have to work with that you just don't know what to cook with them. So that helps you come up with some ideas for recipes, which is really great. And those are just a couple. There's quite a few out there because lots of content lives on the internet. So I encourage others to see what works for them. And better yet, plan your portions so you cook just the right amount and don't end up with leftovers you don't want. And so when I think about, recent sort of gathering I hosted last weekend, I was making sure I knew the quantity. How many people am I expecting? And then I thought about that, of course, before I bought items so that I didn't want to overbuy and I didn't overcook. I come from a sort of big family, and I'm always reminded of how much my mom made, and so I'm just reminded of how easy it is to cook more than we need or buy more than we need. So it's really important to think about your portions to prevent all that excess food waste. And really, there's plenty we can all do to prevent food waste in our home, our workplace, and our community. And I really hope the tips that I've shared are helpful. Like I said earlier, we really welcome additional feedback on what you all are doing to engage in food waste prevention. And let's see here, maybe next slide before I pass it back to Sebastian. Just want to make sure capture. Okay, that's my contact information. If others have ideas that you want to send my way or request for materials, you can reach me at either that email or phone number.
Siempre animo a las personas a amar sus obras. Almacenarlas adecuadamente y reutilizarlas es una excelente manera de empezar. Por lo general, hay dos razones por las que terminamos tirando nuestras obras. Nos olvidamos de ellas o nos aburrimos de comer lo mismo. Afortunadamente, hay respuestas fáciles para ambos problemas. Recuerda comer tus sobras, incluyéndolas en tu plan de comida, almacenándolas en recipientes transparentes para que puedas ver que necesita ser comido, poniendo las sobras en tu recipiente claramente marcado en la parte delantera de tu nevera, manteniendo una lista de sobras almacenadas en tu congelador como recordatorio y evita que las sobras se vuelvan aburridas. Congelando las sobras para variar tus comidas. Tener comidas congeladas a la mano es genial cuando no tienes tiempo ni energía para cocinar. Hay muchos sitios web como la página web del New York Times sobre sobras y Supercook. Supercook es un generador de recetas cero residuos donde puedes encontrar ideas sobre cómo hacer que las sobras sean deliciosas a la segunda y tercera vez. Y lo mejor de todo, planifica tus porciones para que cocines la cantidad justa y no termines con sobras que no quieres. Visita el sitio web de USDA para obtener información sobre sobras y seguridad alimentaria. Hay mucho que todos podemos hacer para prevenir el desperdicio de alimentos en nuestro hogar, lugar de trabajo y comunidad. Espero que los consejos que hemos compartido sean útiles. Agradecemos comentarios adicionales sobre lo que todos ustedes están haciendo para participar en estos esfuerzos importantes. Gracias por acompañarnos en el podcast de hoy. Por favor, comunícate con más preguntas para DVSA y o puedes encontrar mi información de contacto al final de la presentación publicada.
Muchas gracias, Cheryl, por esta excelente presentación. Esta ha sido muy útil para nosotros y definitivamente para nuestra comunidad.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you all, and I hope you go ahead and take these tips and apply them in your very own homes and reach out, as I said, if you have any questions.
Sí, María, ¿tienes alguna pregunta para Cheryl?
No, I don't have a question right now. But I do have this magnet that DVSA created. I don't know if you can see, it's a little blurry. But we're kind of proud of this because we can hand it out to residents and they can use tips. And also there's the SPU flyers and also the flyers that the youth created.
Ya, ahí lo que María nos quiere comentar es que hemos trabajado con Cheryl para consolidar parte de la información que nos han compartido en esta presentación, en este código de barras que está en nuestra página website. Ya lo hemos distribuido a 30 residentes de South Park, pero tenemos más. Y las próximas semanas que vamos a comenzar a monitorear la reducción de basura orgánica, vamos a pasar por más casas a distribuir estos magnetos para que las personas, la comunidad se entere más de estas recomendaciones que Cheryl nos ha compartido el día de hoy. Yo tengo una pregunta, Cheryl.
So we're gonna distribute this.
Tengo una pregunta, Cheryl. ¿Por qué en algunas ciudades, por ejemplo, South Park, se separan basura, reciclaje y orgánico? Y en una comunidad que está cercana, por ejemplo, a Boulevard Park, solamente se separa basura y reciclaje.
So his question is, why in South Park, for example, they have trash, recycle, and compost, and in Boulevard Park, which is nearby, they only have trash and recycle.
Thank you for that question. Remind me, is Boulevard Park, forgive me for my ignorance, is that right within Seattle boundaries?
Está preguntando si Boulevard Park es parte de Seattle.
No.
Yeah, Boulevard Park is not part of Seattle.
Got it. So that's going to get into some of my answers. So I, of course, work with Seattle Public Utilities, and we foster or implement a program for City of Seattle residents. And unfortunately, we don't always have the same requirements for waste collection, recycling, and organics collection as, say, Boulevard Park City. because it's a different jurisdiction. Is it absolutely important? I believe so, but there is some inconsistency, which makes it confusing, I think, for the general public when different cities approach waste management differently. But we hope there's going to be shifts in more continuity with the way we do it in City of Seattle because of many, many reasons, but that's primarily the reason, the jurisdictional differences that exist that can happen.
El Boulevard Park pertenece a otro distrito, entonces, como no pertenece a Seattle, ellos no se enfocan en el compost como lo hace Seattle. Entonces, ese es uno de los problemas porque hay muchas diferencias en ciudades que pertenecen a Seattle y que no pertenecen a Seattle.
Ok. Hemos empezado con nuestro monitoreo de reducción de basura orgánica la semana pasada y hemos tenido varias consultas de las personas y las yardas también es considerado dentro de basura de desperdicio orgánico. ¿Correcto esto?
¿Puedes repetir?
La semana pasada hemos empezado con el monitoreo para reducir y reusar la basura orgánica y la comunidad nos ha preguntado si las yardas o los restos de los jardines también va dentro de los contenedores verdes.
So last week we started doing our monitoring for reduce, reuse organic waste, and the community has been asking us if yard waste is supposed to be in the compost bin.
Thank you for that question, and I'm so glad to hear that you're moving forward with the project. Yes, so in the city of Seattle, the yard waste compost bin, the organic bin, generally speaking, consists of the yard waste and food scraps. So it's all combined, and that has been an evolving stream. At one point, it didn't include all of that, but yes, to answer your question, that includes it all.
Ya. Y también hemos observado que en parte de la basura orgánica, en algunas casas hay vasos o platos que son compostables, pero en otros no, que son reciclables. ¿Cómo es la mejor manera que la gente pueda diferenciar cuándo es compostable o cuándo es reciclable este tipo de materiales, ¿no? Sobre todo ahora que se hace mucho delivery, ¿no?
So we also noticed that people throw a lot of like plates, cups. Some are compostable, some aren't. So one of the main points is how can we tell people to differentiate the compost packaging with the non-compost packaging?
Such a great question, and we get it often, and I don't blame you for the confusion. One thing I want to throw out there is, of course, that Seattle Public Utilities doesn't manage the marketplace, right, of products that exist. So we wish we had some control over that, but that's all to say that there's a plethora, a whole variety of products that we can't keep track of, right? And so it makes it difficult for the consumer, all of us on this call, to really distinguish the difference. But I think one of the criteria that I think is helpful is looking at any branding on compostable packaging, whether it's a plate, a cup, or what have you. Look for that branding that says compostable. It should be marked. If it is not marked when in question, it is probably needing to go in the trash. And then recyclable materials are typically plastic. They have that symbol, right, that looks like a triangle with the arrow. So there's sort of that demarcation on a cup, a plate, or what have you to indicate that it is indeed recyclable. And of course, at SPU, we provide mailers that go out to residents in multifamily and single family residents. You can also ask me and I can send you some of those, or if you have folks that need them. And that lists out some general guidelines around what goes where, because we definitely get those questions a lot, and we know it can be confusing, and we know that folks are trying their best. But yeah, those are a couple tips that I would have. If it's really unclear if it's compostable, we discourage sort of that wishful recycling or insertion of that item in that bin. You know, if there's a doubt, we sort of like to say throw it out, but reference the guide, think about the branding, the marking on the material, on the item, and then go from there. And typically when you look at compostable items, they're sort of fibrous. But again, just making sure that they're clearly marked compostable. That is a huge indicator that you can put it into the yard organics bin. And then of course, you know, things that may not be as obvious to some people, but perhaps all of you on the call or the podcast, are pizza boxes, soiled pizza boxes. Those can go in the yard waste bin typically. So keep that in mind, because that may not be as obvious.
So, lo que dijo es que la mayoría de los contenedores compostables vienen marcados con una hoja y los de plástico tienen el símbolo de reciclaje, que es la flechita. Entonces, esa es una manera de que la gente puede identificarlos, pero también pueden ir a la página web de SPU, y ahí también hay información sobre cómo saber cuál es cuál.
Perfecto. ¿Y eso, esa información es de conocimiento de los restaurantes que hacen delivery? ¿Es regulatorio o en algunos sí, en algunos no?
And is that information available or known to the people that do deliveries?
That's a great question. I don't know. I would hope so. But there's always plenty of opportunity for additional messaging. And really businesses should know that they need to use those compostable materials if they are doing business in the city of Seattle.
Ah,
Dice que no está segura, pero que eh, se puede avisar y hacer más presentaciones o más podcasts para que la gente esté al tanto.
ya, creo que sería una buena oportunidad para mejorar esto, ahora sabiendo que las entregas de comida ha incrementado fuertemente, ¿no?
He said this would be great to know, to reach out to those people, because deliveries, you know, they're always happening. So.
That's a great reminder.
Ok, bueno, de mi parte no tengo más preguntas, más que agradecer a Cheryl. No sé si quiere dar unas últimas palabras antes de despedirnos.
From my end, I don't have any more questions. Very thankful, Sherry, for your knowledge, for sharing your knowledge. I don't know if you want to share anything else before ending the podcast.
Not at this time. Just a reminder to follow us on social media. You saw the social media handle on a prior slide and my contact information at the end slide. If you have questions or requests for materials, I am happy to support, as well as the team here at SBU. Thank you for your interest in this important topic.
No, nada más en este momento, pero nomás avisar que por favor sigan nuestras redes sociales, y si necesitan alguna pregunta, aquí está mi contacto, mi email, mi número de teléfono, y gracias por tenerme.
Bueno, comunidad Lugami Valley, gracias por atender esta importante sesión. Como les mencionamos, las próximas semanas vamos a estar por South Park, los lunes, martes, monitoreando 30 residencias y 5 restaurantes, con la finalidad de poner en práctica todas estas recomendaciones de Seattle Public Utilities. Y tenemos magnetos libres para entregar a ustedes y puedan obtener toda la información que Cheryl nos ha compartido hoy día para enfocarnos en reducir, reusar y reciclar la basura orgánica. Gracias, amigos de Seattle Radio, por esta nueva oportunidad de educar a nuestra comunidad. Para más información, visítenos en www.dbsaseattle.com, nuestra página de Facebook. Ahí van a encontrar en proyectos, en Artrimate Organic Waste, los flyers que estamos mencionando, y también pueden visitar la página web de Seattle Public Utilities o enviar información a Cheryl Anayas, que pusimos la presentación en el email. Muchas gracias y nos vemos hasta la próxima semana.
Hola, muchas gracias. Nuevamente estamos en Amigos de Seattle Radio. Pueden seguir las redes de Amigos de Seattle como Amigos de Seattle y Amigos de Seattle Radio y a Duwamish Valley Sustainability Association en Facebook, Instagram como DBSA-WA y en Facebook como Duwamish Valley Sustainability Association. Muchas gracias y hasta la próxima.